And good evening, everyone, both here present and on video. If my eyes tend to drift towards those present and I don't look up at the screen, for those who are viewing, it doesn't look like there's too many, that's just natural because I can see people here in front of me. And it does look like, Julia, you have a great turnout, so congratulations to you on that. We are going to talk about, in a different order than Julie just presented about, we're going to talk about the open meeting law first, because that seems to have primarily a lot of questions. And it's very exciting stuff, so I want you all to get ready for it. And even though it's so exciting, we're going to try to keep this to 75 minutes that Julie announced in the letter that she sent out to people.
Excuse me, can I just jump in for 1 minute? I'm
Sure.
sorry. For those of you who are calling in, somebody, I can't tell who, but there is someone who has their speaker on. So if you could just mute your speaker while Attorney Hennigan's speaking. And then if you do have a question, you can use the hand raise or again, wave at us, and we can have you unmute and ask. But for right now, if you could just everyone mute their speakers. Thanks.
Great. So let's begin with, usually at this point, dogs stop barking on these things that I'm at. We'll see that. Let's try to get through it though. We'll begin with just.
Very bad.
Let's talk about the purpose of the open meeting law. If you keep this simple concept in mind, it's to ensure transparency. That's all you have to really remember. The open meeting law is to ensure transparency on the part of whatever board or commission that you are involved in or are a member. And the meetings of those bodies that you belong to, whether it be a board, commission, an appointed commission, an elected commission, doesn't make any difference. The meetings of that group are public bodies. And so therefore, it's that public body that has to assure transparency. It's not just up to the chairperson of that body. It's not just up to one particular individual. It's up to the entire committee, commission, board to make sure that that public body is operating in a transparent fashion. And so then we get to the question of what meetings are covered under the open meeting law. With certain exceptions, I think the easiest thing for you all to remember is that all meetings that you're going to likely have are going to be covered by the open meeting law. There are exceptions in the statute that we're going to just look at tonight, but I don't think you really have to worry about them. I think primarily it is open meeting laws for every committee that you're going to be involved in. So we know what transparency is. We know that we're on a public body. We know that we're probably going to always have open public bodies and not executive sessions. So what's the subject matter? What is it that we're dealing with? A meeting of your body or your commission is generally defined as a deliberation of a public body with respect to any matter within that body's jurisdiction. Deliberation, public body, jurisdiction. If those things are applicable to a meeting that you're having, then you are involved in you are required to have that in an open public session. So what constitutes a public body? Any multi-member board, commission, council, authority, or committee or subcommittee which involves anything to do with your local government that you're part of, has been established and is established to serve a public purpose, is subject to the law. So again, 5-member committees, fine. If there's a subcommittee that's appointed by that 5-member committee, that can become a public body also. So that's not usually a difficult issue, but the issue comes into play with some degree of difficulty with what do we mean by deliberation. The open meeting law defines deliberation as any oral or written communication through any medium, including electronic mail, between or among a quorum of a public body on any public business within its jurisdiction. This can present some problems. And we give examples of emails where this can sometimes constitute a problem. Email exchanges between or among a quorum of members of a public body discussing matters within that body's jurisdiction. If that quorum is talking about going to the Red Sox game and your committee doesn't have anything to do with Red Sox games, then that's not a matter within your jurisdiction. But if your committee is talking about the purpose, some business item related to that committee, and you're talking about them on email, even in the simplest fashion, to a quorum of that member of the board, of that commission or board that you're on, then that was going to constitute a deliberation. And that deliberation then is not being done in open meeting. It's not transparent. It's being conducted by a public body, and that would be a violation of the open meeting law. So these can get a little tricky. So let me give you some ideas of some of the problems that the State Ethics Committee, the Attorney General's office has run into. There was a group in Barnstable, Massachusetts. They had communicated by text back and forth about some various issues. Some of the statements that they used were very innocuous. Some of the statements that they were used were talking about scheduling and when can we meet. And those types of things are all legitimate. You can some flexibility to having that kind of general conversation. But where it gets tricky is where one woman on this particular board in Barnstable, after answering a whole series of questions about how her son was and how this person was doing and so forth, wrote, "Yes, we should pass our ordinance and move on." And the fact that she committed that to writing to a quorum of her group by simply saying, "Yes, we should move on, pass the ordinance and move on," they found to be constituted a deliberation of that body outside of the public meeting, and they made a conclusion that that was in violation of the open meeting law. The commission, or the Attorney General's office, is very also concerned about the fact that you don't have to communicate back and forth. It can be a one-way communication. A one-way communication simply saying to every member of your committee or your board, "Hey, I think this is a good idea," or "This seems to be something that we should vote on," or "Yes, I can support this." Anything which you would think is a innocuous type of statement is likely not in terms of the context of the open meeting law, because you are communicating to a quorum your position and your thoughts on a particular matter. And that is a deliberation. And when you get into a deliberation matter, then you have a problem. There's a case back in November of 2019 where the Attorney General's office says a one-way communication from one public body member to a quorum on business within a body's jurisdiction is deliberation, even if no other members respond. It doesn't make any difference to say, well, I didn't get a response from this person, or I didn't hear from these people. I was just giving out my idea. The fact that you're giving out your idea in writing to a quorum is a deliberation, and that deliberation has to be made in public session in order to comply with the open meeting law. And I think I had one more example. Just to show you, there's all sorts of fines that are associated with this. The town can be fined $1,000 if it is determined that the actions of the particular board or commission is deliberate. And an intentional violation or a deliberate violation is an act or omission by a public body or members thereof in knowing violation of the open meeting law. And where a public body acted with deliberate ignorance of the open meeting law, they are subject to a fine. Not them, but the town is subject, or the city is subject to a civil penalty of $1,000 per violation. So there's consequences to it financially to the town, but there's also consequences that if someone was to file a complaint for violation of the open meeting law, if a party felt they were wronged by a decision and they felt there were violations involved and they filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office, it's very possible and highly likely that that particular decision would be voided and the committee would then have to come back and reconsider that particular position all over again. So the open meeting law does have some teeth to it in terms of how it is enforced. And the Attorney General's office writes opinions all the time, and you can read them on their website about particular situations where people are in and they are found to have been in violation of the open meeting law, about what you might consider when you read it to be a very, like I said, a very innocuous type of statement. But you have to keep in mind that if you're talking to someone on that committee about a particular matter that is within your jurisdiction, and if you're talking about it to a quorum, then you may very well have a violation of an open meeting law. So email exchanges between or among a quorum of members of a public body discussing matters within the body's jurisdiction may constitute deliberation, or even when the sender of an email does not ask for a response from the person or persons he's sending. Telephone conversations or informal gatherings between or among a quorum of members of public body discussing matters within the body's jurisdiction may also constitute deliberation. I think you can all see that maybe as even more. For some reason, people seem to think that if you're talking to other members of the board verbally by telephone or whatever on a one-on-one basis, but you're talking again to a quorum of them, that seems to be clearly a violation. And there seems to be sometimes some confusion of carrying that same type of communication over to an email exchange or even to a text exchange as technology advances. Those also are unparalleled with having a verbal conversation with someone and constitute a violation of the open meeting law. Are there any, I mean, I know we're going to keep questions to the end where you can, but yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
If I can relay this question, because it's come up. So if a member talks to another member by telephone or by email, only one other member, but then stops that email and goes to another member and continues to go individually to individual members, that's still a violation.
Still a violation, because it's a serial violation, what they call serial communications, that you're ultimately that individual who's communicating is communicating with the quorum of the body, and that's really what has to be looked at.
So if the member communicates with a quorum, even if it's not all at the same time.
Correct.
It's still a violation.
Correct. Yes.
Sorry, we just have to have anyone who has a question come up to the podium so everyone can hear it who's at home. Thanks.
You noted that the town can be held liable and fined. What about individual members of boards and commissions if a violation takes place?
I don't think, I haven't seen it for an individual on an open meeting law violation. When we get into discussion of conflict of interest, then you're going to see where individuals have been held liable and fined for that. But keep in mind, it's, from what I've seen, and there may be an example that I'm not aware of, but I haven't seen an individual fined for an open meeting law violation. It's the body that is really how you act. Everything's being done in the context of a public body. Is the public body operating correctly? Is the public body transparent? Are the members trying to be transparent? So that's the body that is violating the open meeting law. One of the things, and it's a great question, one of the things that help where the Attorney General's office seems to look for in terms of whether it is an intentional or deliberate violation of the open meeting law is whether the members of the board or commission involved have had training on this. So unfortunately, you have had training, or you will have, and not unfortunately, but you will have. So you can't use the defense of Julie never told me that we couldn't do that. So that one you can use Ed. You can say Ed never told me. Yeah. Can't say Julie.
Thank you. I see Suzette Dowd had her hand raised. Suzette?
Yes, I have a question. Let's say two people met at the dog park and were having a private conversation. Is that an open meeting violation?
What are they talking about?
If they weren't talking about anything to do with the Board of Trustees, they were talking about the dogs.
Then there is no violation. If two people want to talk about,
Doesn't there have to be a quorum for, I mean, if four of us, is four a quorum or five? If four of us went out to dinner and were having a private conversation, we were not talking about anything to do with the Board of Trustees or the library or anything. Is that an open violation? Open meeting law violation?
if you're not talking about anything to do with the Board of Trustees, then, or the library, I don't know where there could be a violation. You're out to dinner, you're socializing, but I don't know where you would ever have a violation of an open meeting law when you're saying you're not talking about anything to do with the jurisdiction of the bodies that you're on.
But if you talk about the
Now, does
library-
that include if you have to have everybody there for it to be an open meeting, and you have to be talking about something going on at the library or the town? Do we need to have a quorum
the one-on-one versus one-on-one.
to make it an open meeting violation? Does there have to be a quorum there?
The communication, if a communication is made with a quorum involved, that could very well be a violation, yes. That quorum doesn't.
If it was not a quorum, so not everybody was there, and nothing was discussed about things happening at the library or the town,
All right, I think I'm
is
hearing.
that an open meeting violation?
I think I'm hearing two things. If you're not talking about anything that has to do with the particular board, the jurisdiction of the particular board you're on, there is no violation. If you're talking about something that's within the jurisdiction of the board that isn't, that a quorum does not exist for, and you don't have further conversations with anyone else about that conversation at a later date about that subject matter that was discussed with one person probably, then you probably don't have a situation of an open meeting law violation. It's when you get into communications that involve a quorum, doesn't have to be a quorum all at once. You could have a quorum over a period of time having this conversation. That would constitute a violation, yes. But not talking about the subject matter of the jurisdiction doesn't constitute a violation.
As long as it's not a quorum, right? And as long as they're not talking about anything happening at the library. Let's say four people from the Board of Trustees wanted to go to dinner and have a private conversation, not talking about the library. Is that acceptable?
That's not a violation because you're not talking about, you're not operating as a board talking about within the board's jurisdiction.
Thank you. That's exactly how I understood it, but I wasn't sure.
Okay. I just want to
wanted that
clarify.
clarified.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, in your question, it sounds like there's two issues. One, if the board doesn't talk about anything, or two,
Right.
if the board talks about something but there isn't a quorum. Under both of those circumstances, if there is no quorum, and if you're not talking about something that's within the board's jurisdiction, there's not a violation, correct?
Correct.
Does that answer your
That's
question?
how I understood it.
But if a board member, if two board members got together and went out to lunch and talked about business of the town, that may come before them at some point, and then that's one of those two went and met with somebody else and talked about it.
That's what we call
Now
a
you're-
serial communication.
Now you have a violation.
Yes. So is that clear?
Right.
Yeah. So,
That's very clear. That's the way I understood it, but I have that question.
Okay, very good. That's a
Oh,
great
thanks,
question.
Okay,
Suzette.
thank you very much.
Thanks, Suzette.
Thank you for confirming that.
You're welcome. All right, so, I know we have another things here. So, we talked about a little bit about requirements for filing and posting notices of a meeting. This has become very important in terms of, again, transparency under the open meeting law. You have to post what you're going to talk about on an agenda so that people know, who want to view the agenda, know what you're going to talk about and how you're going to address it. The publication, a public body must provide the public with notice of its meeting 48 hours in advance, excluding Saturdays and Sundays and legal holidays. Notice of emergency meetings must be posted as soon as reasonably possible. And the issue is, what do you put on the agenda is also sometimes a question that people have. So you want to put on the agenda in a kind of a clear, identifiable way, a date and time of your meeting, obviously, and list the topics that at the time that you're filing this are what is called reasonably anticipated to be discussed. So if you wanted to talk about topic A and you post the meeting to talk about topic A, but after the 48-hour notice comes up, you want to also talk about topic B. And topic B could have been reasonably anticipated to be talked about at this meeting. Then my advice is you don't talk about topic B because you did not give notice to the public that you were going to be talking about. So just be careful about what you do talk about when you're preparing your agendas. Sometimes, if there's an emergency, there are provisions for that. But most of the time, there is not an emergency, and people do look at the agendas. And again, it's under this whole theory of transparency. If you're the public and you want to know what Commission A is going to talk about, and you go online and you look to see what their agenda is, and you don't see topic B on that, then you may not show up at that meeting. So therefore, it cannot be discussed at that particular meeting. Yes, sir.
Just a point of clarification on discussion on an agenda. So if you are discussing an agenda, that conversation isn't considered problematic, for the lack of a better word, if you're trying to put an agenda together. So you can discuss something and then decide later it's not going to go on the agenda. Being part of that conversation is okay.
You mean in terms of
Content, in terms of content.
So you're going to call whatever board you're on.
Right.
You're going to call the chairperson. You might be the chairperson. Somebody might be calling you and say, hey,
You're going to have conversation with multiple people, whether it's one at a time, serial, or in a group, and you're just sort of bantering back and forth about what you're going to put on the agenda.
Yeah, no,
that conversation in itself
I think that conversation is fine because you're not making any decisions on
Exactly.
it. You're not deliberating over it. All you're doing is asking that certain items be put on an agenda so that you can talk about it.
Right. So the formulation of the agenda doesn't cause any havoc.
Does not.
Okay, thank you.
As long as there's no opinion.
Right. Exactly. You can't offer opinion as to what you're going to do on that particular item. So you're just putting the item on the agenda. Correct.
Yeah, I think, I think some of the questions have come in. You can absolutely have a discussion about what items go on the agenda. But when you start discussing what your position is going to be when that item's on the agenda, now you've crossed the line into a violation. Thanks, Patrick. Anyone on who's calling in? I don't see any other hands. There's plenty of time. We can keep moving on. And if you have a question, again, just raise your hand and we'll be able to see it.
And so, obviously, the COVID restrictions that came in from the governor's emergency order several years ago. Was it several years ago?
It was.
A few years ago, seem to require you as the commission or the board that you're on to, if you have to have a remote meeting, to make sure you have adequate alternative means for people to enter into your meeting. Obviously, this type of a meeting tonight, the hybrid type of meeting, is an example of providing all sorts of people, allowing them to come into the meeting and participate. That's what you want to make sure your committee can provide in terms of your meeting. And that's going to go on till July 1st?
July 15th is, yeah, it was an odd date to choose, but it does go on till July 15th. So I should just follow up. All of the chairs should have received an email that I asked the town clerk to send out about a week or two ago, just reminding everybody under that extended law that there are certain things that need to be said at the start of every meeting. And part of that includes identifying who's in person, as well as who's participating remotely. And all votes that take place when you're in a hybrid situation or a 100% remote situation need to be done by roll call. So that is under the new law that will stay in effect until July 15th. And we did come up with a script that every chair could use, and we just left blank places where you fill in your name, the names of members of your committee, and the date, but that does have to be read at the beginning of every meeting. And it's funny, because some people will say, well, who's really watching this? I will tell you, the clerk's office, we got a violation complaint of open meeting law about 2 weeks ago from a gentleman in Alabama who was watching a meeting. If people do watch, and they watch, they call themselves watch guards to make sure that we're following open meeting law. And this person had watched a particular meeting, and the chair had not opened the meeting by stating who was participating remotely. And someone saw it and filed a complaint. And to resolve that complaint, you're required to bring it to the chair. The chair has to address it and say that we won't do that anymore. We'll make sure we read the script, and that has been taken care of. But there are people who watch. We do get complaints of open meeting law. We get complaints mostly of people who call and say that they tried to get on to the meeting and they couldn't, so the remote link was not correct. So that's an open meeting law if you continued your meeting and yet your link was wrong. It's a violation, again, if you don't state what you have to state at the beginning. It's a violation if you don't take a roll call vote if you're holding a hybrid or a remote meeting. And we also have received in the past complaints about agenda items not being specific. You know, people watch the meeting and say, I didn't know that they were going to take a vote on X because the agenda wasn't specific. So those are kinds of the things that we get the complaints about, so we just want to share with you. Those are the things that the watchers who are watching, and they have a right to do so, those are the types of things that they definitely pick up on.
I mentioned, thank you, Julie. I mentioned earlier that all your meetings would most likely be open meetings, that there would be exceptions for executive sessions. The law does provide for 10 executive session purposes. They stem from discussion of reputation, character, and so forth of an individual to contract negotiations and so forth. I don't necessarily think you would encounter that. It's usually on a Board of Selectmen level that you would have it. Is there any commissions that would have any reason to contract negotiations or anything like that? Yeah. So, but just understand in the general context that, you know, you're required to have an open meeting. There are exceptions, and if you think in your committee that this might be one of the exceptions, I would encourage you to contact Julie to have a discussion as to whether you can enter into an executive session properly, because there is a whole formalistic process to follow in order to go into executive session. But I don't want to get into all that because I don't think it's really going to be applicable in 99% of the time that your Board of Commission is meeting. But if you do have questions, then I would suggest that you ask before you hold any executive session at all.
Can I jump in and ask, Ginger, did you want to just make a comment, if you could, about the posting of the meetings? We're talking about the agenda, so it might be a good point to jump in about when they need to be posted and how the clerk's office needs to be aware.
Okay, so Deb wanted me to express to everybody that agendas are to be in 48 hours before your meetings. Would like them to be in not 1 minute before the meeting, or 1 minute before your 24 hours is up, only because we have to process them, we have to stamp them, we have to get them out. And it's your responsibility to make sure that they are posted. So don't just rely on, oh, I sent it in, it's posted. Make sure you receive an email back from us. If you don't hear from us, give us a call, email us again, make sure that it's been posted. Okay. It's pretty much basically what she wanted me to make sure got out.
Yeah, and I think where we've, you know, and you have to remember the 48-hour posting, remember if it's a holiday, so if if you have a meeting on a Tuesday and you normally get it to us on a Friday.
On Friday, and Monday's a holiday.
And Monday's a holiday, you have to get it to us the day before that, so it has to be here on Thursday. And again, sometimes the emails have come in from various boards or commissions, and they come in after the office is closed, or someone in the office didn't see the email. So it doesn't count as posting it just because you hit send. It counts as posting it once the clerk's office physically posts it. So that's what the AG's office requires. So that's why the clerk's office just needs a little heads up that that notice is coming, so they have chance to open it, read it, and do what they have to do to get it posted.
Yeah, it's basically all she wanted me to get out there, so.
Thanks, Ginger.
You're welcome.
Great job. See, she loves this job. And I should say, Ginger's been an employee of the town for
This Friday will be 2 years.
2 years. She worked in the Development and Special Services Division, so she's very familiar with the town and a lot of the processes, and many of you have probably worked with her in a different capacity. So she may be the first day in the clerk's office, but she's 2 years here. So, thanks.
And Julie asked me to emphasize a point here that apparently has arisen. But telling an attendee at an open meeting that they have to leave that meeting is kind of contradictory to the whole concept of transparency that we started to talk about right at the beginning. So you can't do that. You can't ask any attendee unless they're unruly and they need to be removed for their behavior. That's a different story. The chair has the authority to ask somebody to leave. The chair has the right to stop the meeting until that person leaves. But absent any of those kind of unique circumstances, the chair or a board member asking someone to leave a meeting can't be done, nor could you close a door to a meeting. I actually had this happen in another town where a planning board actually closed the door to a meeting so that no one could get in to hear the item that was being discussed. That conduct was not favorably received, I can tell you that. So you can't do that. You have to leave the doors open. You can't kick people out of the meeting. Again, we're all dealing with a matter of transparency. All right, we kind of touched on open meeting law a bit. Any questions on that issue from anybody else as to its applicability or what it means or how you work with it? All right, so I'm going to move on. The next item on the agenda that I have is to just talk about briefly Robert's rules. I do know that in your packet, I think it's the handbook. Is it the handbook?
Right, and I should say, while Bob is looking for that, the handbook is available on the town clerk's website. It's there all the time. So if you don't have a copy or you lose your copy, you don't want to carry your copy around, you can go onto the website and everything's right there on the website under the town clerk's department.
So in there's just simply a Robert's Rules summary. This is Robert's Rules' most recent edition. It's also very exciting to read. But on page 6, I think it is in that handbook. Is that page 6? Is it on the handbook? I can tell you in a second if I have it. Maybe I don't. I have it somewhere. I'm sorry? No, I have it. I just have my own. Yeah, thank you. I just have to find it. Yes, on page 6 of this board and committee handbook, there is the outline of Robert's Rules. And this is really for everyone to have some idea how do you actually run a meeting. And so we just kind of looked at simplifying this for people to tell them how to run a meeting. So the meetings usually, you have an agenda, and when there's a topic on an agenda, you have some discussion over it. But at some point in time, usually, the committee is faced with the decision, okay, what do we do with this particular item? What do we do with this particular matter? How do we move it along? So the first thing that someone has to do usually is to make a motion on the committee, to make a motion to do something with topic A, to file it, to approve it, to deny it, whatever. That motion has to be seconded so that there's a sufficient second in a committee so that the committee now is got a basis for carrying it forward. Oftentimes, when you have discussion of an item and then you have a motion and a second, there is no further discussion. People oftentimes just go ahead and vote. Technically, the motion is to be discussed because the motion can sometimes have certain language in it. I move that so-and-so, that this be done at this time, at this thing. And people on the committee don't like the specificity of the motion, or they don't like the way the motion's worded or so forth. So you normally in the process have discussion. Some point in time, the natural discussion is going to turn out that someone's going to make a motion. That motion is going to be seconded, but there's always an opportunity to discuss the issue as presented in the motion. And you can change it, you can alter it, you can amend it, and so forth. I'll talk about that in a second. So there's a motion, there's a second, then there's discussion. Usually, debate, deliberation, clarification is made on the particular motion, and then the chair usually calls the matter for a vote. And that's usually the simplified way of handling any particular item. Sometimes a motion is made and someone wants to amend the motion, which is perfectly legitimate. An amendment to a motion also requires a second. And then there's discussion on that amendment by the board or commission. And then after that discussion, there's a vote on the amendment. If the amendment passes, the original motion is now known as the motion as amended, and it is voted. If the amendment is defeated, the vote is just simply taken on an original motion. Sometimes, when the motion is brought to a vote, members may abstain from voting. However, members should explain for the record why they wish to abstain. This is going to come up a little bit further in our conversation on conflict of interest in a minute. But just so you understand, the most common reason for obviously abstaining is because of a conflict of interest. The fact that, just want to make this one point, the fact that you as a member of a committee or a board or a commission can't come to a decision on a particular matter and don't know how to proceed, don't know how to vote on it, that's not sufficient for you to say, I abstain. It happens. There's a tendency people have an interest of not knowing what to do on it. That's really not a legitimate function of you as a member of that board or committee or commission. You're there to make those decisions. Now, if you can't because you have a conflict of interest, that's one thing. Then you announce that and I'm going to tell you in a few minutes, you get out of there and make sure you don't get yourself into a conflict. But if you just don't know, you're puzzled by what to do, and you can't come to a decision, you can't just say, I abstain because I don't know what to do. That's not really a good way to proceed. So my suggestion would be to try to not do that. I know that the Board of Selectmen adopted at some point in time in the past, the rules, Robert's rules as their rules. I don't know if that was ever carried out to the rest of the boards and commissions in the town. I don't remember that. I should have looked it up and I forgot to do it today. But in any event, it is a good choice for the committee. The committee can always say we're going to be guided by Robert's rules and proceed along those lines. But even if, Robert's rules can get very, very technical and very, very complicated. Even if you don't say you have Robert's rules, you have a process for how you're going to move issues along. What we've presented to you in terms of a Robert's Rules summary is more the function, how you function in terms of a committee operation versus whether it's applicable to Robert's Rules specifically or not. Any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward.
I think there was a question that someone had asked earlier. I just want to make sure I'm covering it. That when you talked about a person there's a roll call vote and someone has to make a motion, the second person seconds the motion. When the chair does the roll call vote, they have to go back to the person who made the motion and the one who seconded it and get their vote at the same time. Just because they said,
yes,
I make a motion, I second the motion, you don't just then go to the remaining members. You have to go to the beginning and count everybody.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the fact that someone makes a motion and second doesn't mean they've voted. Correct. They have to. I think we may know people who have seconded on a motion and then voted against it. So it's just, yeah. But you have that's a different Making a motion and seconding it is different than voting. So yes, you have to do that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Thanks.
All right, so let me turn your attention to the conflict of interest law. This one, there is, was this sent to them, everyone, Judy? Julie? This packet of material? Or is this just on their website?
I think it was on the website.
Okay, so there is a handout that has, that was presented on the website, or it's even, you can obtain it from the State Ethics Commission. But the conflict of interest law is under what's called General Laws, Chapter 268A. And it sounds like a very complicated series of issues, but it really tries to address how you conduct yourself as a municipal employee. Even though you are a volunteer or involved in a committee or a board or a commission, I don't know if there's any stipends paid, I don't think there are, but if there were stipends paid on a board or committee, it doesn't make any difference what you're being paid or whether you're a volunteer. You are all considered, once you are sworn in, to be a municipal employee. And that municipal employee then is subject to this conflict of interest statute. And it governs how you conduct yourself as a public official. To the question before about the town being fined, the conflict of interest law applies to the individual. And you could face both civil and criminal penalties if you were to be involved in the prohibited actions that are defined in the State Ethics Commission statute. So I just tried to give a general provisions of what are involved in, what are you prohibited from doing. And I think you're going to see they're common sense types of things, but it's important to understand that they apply. So number one, you may not ask for or accept anything, regardless of its value, if it is offered to you in exchange for your agreeing to perform or not perform an official act. So that's a bribe. You can't accept bribes. Pretty clear. You may not ask for or accept anything worth $50 or more from anyone with whom you have any official dealings. Examples of this as gifts include sports tickets, cost of drinks and meals, travel expenses, conference fees, gifts of appreciation, entertainment expenses, free use of vacation homes, as tempting as that might be, or complimentary tickets to charitable events. So you can't go in exchange for your actions, you can't ask for anything of those particular matters. The simple thing is, they're gifts, don't take them, and don't ask for them. You cannot participate in the employment of your immediate family or your spouse's immediate family. Again, that may not apply to a particular committee or commission that you're on. You may not, however, take any type of official action which will affect the financial interests of your immediate family or your spouse's immediate family. So, a particular matter, if you were on a board or a committee that was reviewing land, in parcel A was what was before your committee, but on parcel B there was a member of your immediate family living there, then you would have to recuse yourself from that particular matter. It's an easy example, but it's the example that you would have to recuse yourself because you're taking any action on parcel A would be an official action affecting the financial interests of your immediate family who own, or spouse's immediate family who owns a house next door. You may not take any official action affecting your own financial interest or the financial interest of a business partner or any organization for which you serve as an officer, director, or trustee. So if you're getting paid from someone and that someone has some matter before the board that you're particularly on, then you cannot participate in that particular matter and you would have to excuse yourself from taking any official action involved. There are all sorts of exemptions to this one. Not all sorts, but there are a few exemptions. So this is how we say it, unless you qualify for an exemption, you may not have more than one job with the same municipality that you presently have a job for. You can only have one job, and that might be enough for you, so that you can't have two, certainly can't have three or four, because then you get into financial interest situations there. And you may not have a financial interest. You can't have a financial interest in a contract that the town has. So similar to having the financial interest of a business partner. You also may never disclose confidential information, data, or material which you gained or learned as a public employee. I haven't read a lot of cases that explain this, to tell you the truth, and I don't see it very often. But if there is confidential information disclosed somehow, you have to keep that quiet. I don't know how that's done, to tell you the truth, in a public meeting, how some disclosure would be made. But I just passed that along because it is in the law. And you may not use public resources for political or private purposes. So one of the things of the open meeting, of the conflict of interest law, is what happens when you leave your employment with the town. There are what we call prohibitions because of the work you did. There's what is called a forever ban to prohibitions, and there's called a 1-year cooling off period. And the forever ban says that after you leave your municipal job, you may never work for anyone other than the municipality on a matter that you worked on as a municipal employee. This can get a little confusing, but if you were involved, I'll give you the example. If you participated in a matter as a municipal employee, you cannot ever be paid to work on that same matter for anyone other than the municipality, nor may you act for someone else on that particular matter. That differs from this, what we call this 1-year period, because this 1-year cooling off period says for 1 year after you leave your municipal job, you may not participate in any matter over which you had official responsibility during your last 2 years of public service. The difference is how involved were you in a particular matter? That's what it comes down to. If you were involved in a particular matter that you worked on as a municipal employee, then you're forever banned from working on that matter when you leave your municipal service. The 1-year ban goes if it was within your official responsibility. So most of your particular matters that you have to be concerned about will fall under that 1-year ban, where you have to be concerned that you don't do something after you leave that you had an official responsibility over in terms of your, doing any action on that after you leave your employment. And let me just give you one other thing in terms of conflict of interest. And then I'm going to just show you a couple decisions that have come out that kind of point out why it's important to at least have a flavor or an understanding of the conflict of interest law. There's a section in the conflict of interest law, what we call section 23, which says that the biggest thing is you cannot act in a manner which would cause a reasonable person having knowledge of relevant circumstances to conclude that you can be improperly influenced or unduly enjoy his favor to the performance of your official duty. You cannot indicate to anybody that or indicate in any way so that that person could conclude that you can be improperly influenced or unduly enjoy their favor. That's the type of what we call improper activity. It's the appearance of impropriety that people have to be concerned about. You have to be above board. You have to be transparent. You cannot give the appearance of impropriety. Even the appearance of impropriety has consequences and could have potential civil and or criminal penalties enforced by the Inspector General's office. So let me just give you a quick idea of what some of these things are in terms of fines. In Uxbridge, this is an older decision, but in Uxbridge, a member of a conservation commission who had a matter that he was interested in, he smartly refused to speak on that issue when it was before his conservation commission. So he recused himself smartly from his participation in that matter. But he then went down and spoke from the audience in opposition to the matter. So he didn't recuse himself. And I always tell people, if you have a matter that you need to recuse yourself from, state for the record you're recusing yourself because you have a financial interest, you think there's a conflict of interest, you state whatever is the reason, then you physically get up from this chair, and I tell people, go outside and sit and wait till the matter's over, so that no one could ever be involved. I mean, I've seen cases where people, were going like this to someone in the background to the guy objects, he goes, sits in the back, but he goes with his hand signals to other people as to what to say and what to do and so forth. Yeah, nobody can accuse you of that if you get outside and leave the meeting entirely. So this particular gentleman, unfortunately, he was fined himself $2,500 for his actions. There was a gentleman, this one is a more recent one that I came across back in 2020, where it was a chairman of the Board of Selectmen in the town of Brookfield. And he was interested in, oftentimes a lot of this involves parcels of land. He was involved in a parcel of land, or he heard about a parcel of land that somebody wanted to donate to the town. And he thought it was a really nice piece of land. He started to not complain, but put up questions about it being gifted to the town, and there would be problems with it for the town. There were title problems on it, and the town may not want to get involved. The matter was put on for a town meeting vote, as I understood the facts, and the town meeting was to vote on this at a particular matter on a Tuesday, let's say. That previous to that Tuesday, the gentleman who thought this was a terrible deal for the town purchased the property. And so the State Ethics Commission did not like that. His fine was $20,000. So they have the ability, and that's paid by that individual. It's not paid by the town. That seems to be the extreme ones, but you wonder why people would not see the blatant conflict that would be in there and why they would go forward and do it. So the commission, the State Ethics Commission, certainly came down on them and fined him $20,000 for that particular matter. So that, so I just share that with you just because there is a reason to be cautious in terms of conflict of interest. And again, if you feel you're in a situation that you're presented with a conflict, the State Ethics Commission has a hotline that you can call, and they can give you advice. You can call Julie. The statute allows the town council to give advice. The town council, when he gives advice, he has to receive a written statement of the issue and the facts. And when he issues an opinion, he's required by law to file it with the clerk's office. So sometimes maybe you don't want to get into that much of detail with people. So, I often give people the option to go to the State Ethics Commission hotline, and they are, most of the time, I think, pretty good about answering questions that people have.
I think just to follow up on that, because this has come up a number of times, some employees will say, or some board members will say, can I call the state hotline on behalf of somebody else? And you can, but they won't answer you. So we've even learned it here. Even for your own employees, a supervisor can't call on behalf of an employee or the other way around. State ethics will only answer the person to whom the matter pertains. So you can call for yourself, you just can't call for somebody else. And I know sometimes people don't want to call on their own, they're uncomfortable doing it, but unfortunately you're not going to get an answer unless you call on your own.
Yeah. And they do not give answers easily. They don't want to necessarily, but it's worth sometimes talking to their attorney online who can sometimes give good guidance.
Absolutely. If you have a question, if you have a conflict of interest, you think you might have a conflict of interest, call them, explain the situation. We're finding that even with COVID and everything going on, we were getting answers back initially within about a day, and maybe it takes a couple days. But it's worth the extra call just to make sure you're comfortable with whatever it is you're concerned about for your own person.
Any questions on conflict of interest? I'm sorry, it's a tough area of the law to run over within 17 minutes, but there'll be a small test as you leave to see if everybody understood it. The next,
I have a question.
yes.
Yep. Suzette?
Can you be in a leadership position, two leadership positions under one? Because I'm the vice chair of the Board of Trustees and I'm the director of the Friends. The director at large, not the director of Board of Trustees. Is that legal?
Yeah, that's an issue that I don't think I can answer off the top right here as a legitimate, as a question in a form. I do think it is the role, the convergence of two roles has to be examined. So that would, I would ask you, Suzette, is it? Mm-hmm. Suzette? If that's a concern, that you give me some further information, or give Julie some further information, and we have an opportunity to look at that.
Thank you. It is in our bylaws.
Okay.
So I know several years ago, we had a similar situation where we had questions from the Council on Aging as to whether members on the Council on Aging could be on the Friends of the Senior Center. And at the time, after looking into that issue, again, every issue has to be looked at separately, but that was determined that they could not be on both. So you had to make a decision. You had to choose between being on the Friends of the Senior Center and being on the Council of Aging. Because there was a conflict, if you were on the Council on Aging, you were potentially going to the Friends and seeking money for something at the Senior Center, or advocating for something at the Senior Center, or opposing something. So we had to make sure that we no longer appointed anyone to the Council of Aging who was on the Friends of the Senior Center. So it's likely a similar situation, but again, Suzette, we just want to know all the facts so we don't just give you a standard block answer.
Yeah, I'm in no position on a specific question about whether a particular fact pattern is a violation of a conflict. I would never try to answer that off the cuff here tonight. My sense, and I'll be happy to answer out it with further information, but my question in terms of, are there any questions in terms of the general scope of the conflict of interest statute, what it prohibits and what it doesn't? Okay.
Bob, can I ask
Yeah.
one more? Because this has come up in the past too. Some members have asked, or the Board of Commission because they're on the Board of Commission, they believe that they have access to certain information that the general public doesn't have access to. And under the conflict of interest law, you can't use your position to gain access to something that the general public can't have access to. So if your whole board is presented with the information, then yes, it's public information, your whole board has it. If you as an individual board member want some information, if it's not known to the public, just because you're a member of that Board of Commission doesn't give you access to that information. If it's public information, you can always file a public information request and get the information, but if it's not public information, a board member can't demand to have that information because that would be considered a violation of the conflict of interest. We did have that arise several years ago, and that was the determination from the state, was that information couldn't be passed along because it wasn't general information. It hasn't happened in many, many years, but I just thought I'd mention it because it did come up that one particular time. And also, just a clarification, because as Attorney Hennigan said, you can't have two jobs within the same municipality. The only way that would ever work is to have the position, not the person, designated as a special town employee. So we do have a number of positions in town that are, including boards and commissions. If you're on that Board of Commission, you're designated as a special town employee, which allows you, let's say you're an attorney or you're an environmentalist. It allows you to practice your industry, your trade, without being a violation. and everyone has to be looked at. So again, it's the position, not the person. Just another example, we will oftentimes use, or we had employees on the town side that were maybe refereeing at the school. So they were getting paid to be a referee for games. The only way to do that is we had to have the Board of Selectmen vote them as a special town employee. And that means that they can get a check from the town for their regular job, and they can also get a check from the school department for the refereeing of those games. So that's just some examples. So there may be a nuance to something where we would have to look at and say, you fall under the special town employee statute, in which case the Board of Selectmen would have to take a specific vote. So if anything like that ever comes up, again, feel free to reach out, ask me. What we would do is check with the town clerk's office first. We have a whole list of positions, and that includes, I think that included some boarding committees. I know it included positions where people may plow, for instance, for the town. They work in another department, and that's their full-time job. And not if that is their job plowing, but if, let's say you work at the fire department and you're gonna plow, then you would be made a special town employee, so you could do both. So there are some situations where we've done that.
There are, and the distinction is whether you're doing a job, two jobs, as a municipal employee. If you're doing another job as a special municipal employee in addition to a job as a municipal, that's, now we're getting into a distinction of employees. But when I was talking about the municipal, the two-side municipal employee. But the list is of special employees, that was back in February of 2017, I think.
Yeah, we
the board
updated
went
it.
through and updated all the special municipal employee categories. So that's a very good point. It's an excellent point that there may be those exceptions in those particular areas that have to be looked at. The final comment that is on our agenda, which is a quick one, before we get into any other questions, is just what are requirements under the Auburn's general administrative bylaws for boards and commissions. This is also in your handbook, I think in pages 2 to 5. But just so everyone who's on an elective board understands, it is in a bylaw that all elective boards shall conduct regular meetings and shall, within 7 days after the annual election, publicly announce their organization and the time and place of said elective boards' meetings throughout the year, and shall at the same time file such information with the town clerk. For appointed boards, this is all under Chapter 3 of the town bylaws. For appointed boards, they shall conduct regular meetings and shall reorganize at the most appropriate opportunity in the fiscal year. And all boards, committees, commissions, elected, appointed, standing, or ad hoc, shall keep minutes of each meeting, and a copy of said minutes shall be sent to the town clerk within 2 weeks of their approval. So kind of important kind of functions that the board has to ministerially make sure they're following in terms of how these functions take place. And then there's the final one is a swearing in of committees. All members of all boards, commissions, and committees whose duty include the expenditure of town funds shall be sworn to the performance of their duties within 7 days of their notification by the town clerk. So just, I don't know how many that would be, but there's a few that have to be aware of that particular.
And everyone has to be sworn in once you're
Regularly.
appointed anyway, or elected. There's a certain period of time that you have to be sworn in. And sometimes we've had members who weren't sworn in and they went to the meeting. Technically, you could go to the meeting, but technically, you're not a real member of that committee until you've been sworn in. So you shouldn't be taking any votes. And we've often made accommodations through the clerk's office, and the town clerk and assistant town clerk are great about that. If you're new to a committee or board and you were elected and you have a meeting the next day, oftentimes the town clerk will stay late, meet you here right before your meeting, swear you in that same night, so you'll be able to participate in the meeting. So we can make accommodations for you, just need a little bit of a heads up that we need to do that, so we make sure someone's here to help you.
All right, it is 7:11. And are there any general questions people have about anything we've talked about this evening? Julie, anybody indicating they have any questions on our board?
Not right now. I don't see anyone. Again, I would just say there's a lot of material here that we've given to you. You know, you do have the conflict of interest training online, but there is this entire packet on the town clerk's website for those of you who are participating remotely. You can always contact our office and we'll try to give you the appropriate information. Again, if any one of us happen to notice an open meeting law violation, we will point it out, so we make sure that you're aware of it too. Oftentimes it happens and you just don't know. So sometimes you've all probably received an email from one of us at some point saying, just be careful, open meeting law, make sure you don't talk to the other members about that. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot of information, and we're just here as a resource, so we're thrilled to have you here to participate in the training. We really appreciate it. And just on a separate subject, I want to thank everyone who's sitting here, whether you're elected or appointed, just for all the work that you do for the town. We know it's a lot of work. You have a lot on your plate. You all have other jobs and lives and responsibilities, and yet you're taking the time to volunteer your time for the town. And it doesn't go without appreciation for any of us, including the department heads that are here tonight who work with a number of you. So we're happy. We're always here as a resource. Happy to work with you. We know the work that you do on behalf of the town. And I would just say, if you know other people in town who are interested, we're always looking for positions. We're always seem to have openings on boards and committees. There's attrition. Just keep in mind, you have to be a registered voter, have to be an Auburn resident. And other than the library board of trustees, every committee or board in town has to be made up of an odd number. So one more thing I should just point out on the quorum issue, because this also comes up. If you have a 7-member board and you only have 4 members on that board, your quorum is still 4. Your quorum is based on the number of members of seats that you have, whether those seats are filled or not. So if you're missing people on your board, you still have to keep in mind, what is the total complement of your board if you were to have everyone there? And that always remains your quorum. And that, I know the clerk's office gets that question a lot. Well, we're down a couple members, so, you know, can we still meet anyway? You can meet you could meet informally, but you're not meeting as a board. You could meet, but you can't take any positions, you can't take any votes, so technically you can't have a meeting unless you have that quorum. So the quorum is based on the quorum of your board. And the only other one that doesn't, again, have to be an odd number is the Library Board of Trustees. Under the charter, they are a 6-member board and elected, whereas all the other ones have to be an odd number. So we do have a website where it's on the town's website, where we post board and commission vacancies and openings, and you can take a look at it. There's always openings. If you know friends, neighbors, family who's interested in it, we're always looking for volunteers like yourselves who are willing to put the time in. Certain boards take a lot more time than others, the regulatory boards and commissions. And I would say on regulatory boards and commissions, it's critically important to understand how you take the vote, the roll call vote, whether you've followed the law exactly, because in those cases, you could end up in a court case where somebody appeals the decision that regulatory board or commission made. And the board, meaning the town, could lose on an appeal if the process wasn't followed. So that's why it's so important. And again, the fines, if we are, and people watch, but if we are fined, that comes on the town. If it's a conflict of interest fine, again, just a reminder, that also could be you personally. And there's also fines personally for board and commission members that violate someone's constitutional rights, whether it be an employee or another board member. A violation of a constitutional right can result in a civil fine for the individual, not for the town. So just kind of keep those things in mind. And again, we're all here to answer any questions that you may have on it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. Eddie, I'm done.
Just one comment in closing. I know your boards, committees have various expenses that you deal with on a yearly basis, whether they be educational in nature or conferences, peer reviews, advertising notices, and some other costs. But just make sure that you work with the admin support people here at Town Hall so they can make sure that they have a fee in place and commit those funds prior to the expense actually being made. That would be consistent with our purchase order policy and the town bylaws that requires that we commit these funds prior to any procurement or ordering of purchase services. So if you have any questions, feel free to call our office and we can help you out if need be. But I just wanted to convey that to you all tonight.
Thanks. Thank you, Attorney Hennigan, always,
very much.
always a pleasure, nice to see everybody in person, no masks.
Yeah, right.
And let's hope we're past the worst of it, we hope, right? So thank you all, thanks to everyone from home and other places that you called in, we really appreciate you taking the time. Have a good night.